What's going on, guys? Today it is all about the Sony ZV-E1. Now, I've had the pleasure of using this camera since it very first launched, and actually a little bit beforehand. At Sony Camera Camp, I got to get my hands on this thing early, and I loved it so much I picked one up for myself on launch day. So it's safe to say I've been using this camera a ton for a long time now, so I have some really strong thoughts about it. So in today's video, I want to talk about the things that I love about this camera, as well as some things that I don't love so much, or maybe I wish were a little bit different about it. And even more so, right? Every camera out there is not going to check every box for every type of creator out there. Sony offers a ton of cameras for specific reasons, and I really want to talk about who I think this camera is for and talk about all my thoughts on it. So if you're thinking about picking this camera up for yourself or just want to learn more about it, this is the video for you. Be sure to drop me any comments that you have about it that I don't answer. Be sure you're subscribed, and let's go ahead and start off with the things that I love about the Sony ZV-E1. So the first thing I love about the Sony ZV-E1 is the image out of it. Now, this has the same sensor that the Sony a7S III and the Sony FX3 has. The Sony FX3 is what I'm actually filming on right now. And in case you guys aren't familiar with those cameras, in my opinion, it is the best sensor that you can get right now for shooting video content. It's going to look amazing as well as perform awesome in low light. And the dynamic range in S-Log3 is stunning. You can shoot 24 frames per second, 30, 60, and even up to 120. So I could go on and on about it, but truly you're gonna get one of the best looking video images out of any camera out right now using this thing right here, which is pretty impressive for the price point. So the next thing I love about this camera is the size of it. Now, as I mentioned, right now I'm filming on the Sony FX3, and I've used and owned a ton of different Sony cameras out there. And the biggest appeal to me with this camera is the actual size of it. So even looking at it compared to the FX3, it is significantly smaller. And I think this is something a lot of people kind of overlook. Maybe you're like, oh, why would that even matter? If you're gonna be taking this thing everywhere with you, like myself, I love to vlog with this camera, and it's so nice because it's small and you can just kind of take it around anywhere with you. It's lightweight, it's not gonna hold you down. And if I'm shooting vertical content, I can mount this thing in some weird places. If you put it in your normal backpack or even in your camera bag to bring a second camera body, I think for any type of camera, the easier it is to take with you, the easier it's gonna be to go out and just create some content. So the fact that this thing is small, lightweight, but still this powerful is absolutely insane. And to kind of go along with that, leading into my next thing I love is the internal microphone of this camera. So this is actually one huge thing that it has compared to some other cameras out there like the FX3, the a7S III, and that's the fact that it has a very good internal microphone. And you might be wondering, why does that matter? Well, again, if you're trying to have a small kind of content camera package, right, to take out and about, even putting on a small Sony microphone on top of this camera does add some more bulk to it, even as small as those are. So like this setup you guys see right here, this is actually a setup that I use quite often. This is just a Sony ZV-E1. This is a 20mm 1.8 G Master lens. And then guess what? If I want to take this thing out and just use the internal microphone, this is my entire setup right here. And this thing is tiny. Now I want to do a quick little audio test for myself and also for you guys if you're interested in this camera. I want to test the internal microphone against the ECM, what is this, the B10, directly back and forth. This is a microphone test with the ZV-1 with the internal microphone. It sounds like this. I don't have anything set up. It's just auto settings. Then we'll throw this microphone on there. And then now this clip is with the Sony ECM. Let me know down in the comments below how it kind of compares. Now, is the internal microphone gonna sound as good as a huge, shotgun microphone? No, absolutely not. But again, it kind of depends on your use cases with this. If I was, on a weekend trip in LA or something, and I want just a small camera to kind of take out with me for the day, kind of just vlog or shoot content or whatever, this is super nice because it doesn't have any bulk. I don't have a shotgun microphone on top of it that I have to worry about, if I'm knocking it into things or if it's gonna get messed up in my bag or whatever. Or sometimes you actually just take out your camera thinking you're not shooting audio, and then you get into a point where you wanna film something or talk to the camera. And guess what? This microphone is way better than most cameras' internal microphones. Another thing I love is the photography in this camera. Now we'll make this point quick. Again, same sensor as the FX3. I have a whole video talking about shooting photos on the Sony FX3 because a lot of these video first cameras, people are wondering if they can still be somewhat of a hybrid. The shorter answer with this camera is yes. It's only 12 megapixels, but again, that means it's good in low light. And also, unless you're blowing these photos up gigantic, if you're shooting any sort of photos for web anyways, they're going to get compressed. I've shot a good amount of photos with this thing for stuff on my IG, and I think it looks awesome. But this camera is video first, and I think of it really as a video camera, but it's nice as it can be a little bit of a hybrid if you need to get some photos out of it too. Next up is I actually really like the SD card placement of this, and you might be wondering, why does that matter? So I shoot a ton of vertical content, right? And pretty much anyone these days are, or probably should. Most cameras on an L bracket, right? Like this, for example, on my FX3, if I mount it on an L bracket, the memory card slot falls inside this L bracket. So I have to take it off the L bracket to take out the card. It's a small feature, but this one, it's actually on top. So even if this is mounted on L bracket, I can just pop in and out the SD card right on top. Another really big plus about this camera is the fact that it has some AI features. Now I'm gonna keep it very real with you guys. I don't use the AI features a ton on this camera just because with my workflow and what my shooting style is, I just currently don't use them a ton. But what I do enjoy is there's a feature with auto tracking. So you can throw this thing on a tripod and it's going to track your subject around and almost gives it like a handheld feel, even if you're recording something by yourself. And then also another great thing about that internal microphone is the fact that this camera is smart enough that it knows if there's a subject in front of the camera versus behind it. It's going to use the microphone differently to get the best audio out of it, or even just the way that it can remember faces, subjects, etc. Sony's always kind of been ahead of the pack with the technology side of things, and it's no different with this camera. And there's even more to the AI features than what I even use. And then lastly, for the things I love about the Sony ZV-E1, actually there's probably more, but the last on this list is going to be the price point. So this camera, as of right now, comes in at $2,200. It might even be on sale by the time you're looking at this video. I'll have it linked down below. And yes, I know that is a large chunk of money, but for what you're getting out of a camera, it's pretty insane to me. When you're talking about this camera stacks up against some big dogs like the A7S III or the FX3, which are $3,500 and $3,900, this thing being at $2,200 is an insane deal. Now there's a couple drawbacks as to why you would get this versus those, which we'll talk about here in a second. But if you're talking about actual price point of this camera, you cannot get anything that's going to shoot video footage that's going to perform better than this camera right here, in my opinion. All right, so those are the things that I love about the Sony ZV-E1. Let's go ahead and talk about a couple of things that I wish were a little bit different about it, or maybe some things to consider if you're thinking about picking this up for yourself. So the first thing on this list is overheating. Now, if you've researched this camera, you may have heard about it overheating before. And personally, I'm not really concerned about it, and you probably shouldn't either, depending on how you intend to use this camera, which we'll talk about more here in a second. But the facts are, you know, when you're comparing this camera to the FX3 is almost double the price. It has a built-in internal fan, a larger camera body, which allows for more heat dissipation. When you're trying to pack all that performance and power into a larger camera, into a small camera body, there is going to be some sort of downside. And unfortunately for this camera, it is the fact that it can overheat. Now, in my personal experience, I've only ever seen the overheat warning come on one time, but that's just personally how I use this camera. I use it in small burst shooting, whether it be for vertical content, for vlogging, just stuff on the go, even some sit down videos like this. And we'll talk more about why I'm not so concerned about that here in a second, but the facts are you should be aware that this camera can overheat for extended periods of time. There's some other videos out there from awesome creators that have tested out the actual lengths, but in my head, if you're trying to sit down and film for like 45 minutes or more at once, it's something to think about that may be happening. So the next thing on the list is the lack of mounting points. Now on the FX3, I've become spoiled because it has a ton of mounting points all over the camera body. And when this camera dropped, my first initial reaction of it was, oh man, this is going to be the best camera for vertical shooters out right now. And again, even if you don't shoot a ton of vertical content or it's not your main style of content, it is still really important for any sort of creator these days on any platform, or even if you're doing client work. We all know brands, people, content in general, you're gonna have to shoot vertical content. And why this camera was so attractive for me with that in mind, and so many others, I remember even my buddy Lo and a few of us others picked this up solely with vertical content in mind because it's so small and nimble. And a lot of times if you're shooting the style of content I do, kind of like lifestyle stuff, day in the life stuff, you're taking this camera everywhere. Again, the smaller it can be, the better. And so I really just wish if this thing had a mounting point on the bottom for shooting vertical content, this thing would pop off even more. It would be so huge. So that's pretty much it for that part of the list because I am really truly a fan of this camera. But I want to talk about who I think this camera is for, okay? And before I do that, let me explain why I personally picked up this camera for myself. So I shoot a ton of content in general, long form, short short form photos. And for me, first and foremost, I wanted a second camera body to have a second angle when that is needed for my content. Secondly, I wanted a small, nimble, but still powerful camera to kind of stay up with my standard of quality that I have for myself. And so when I picked this thing up, I had that in mind. This was going to be my main vertical content shooter, maybe my main camera for vlogging as well. So I personally only intend to use it in bursts of time. And that's kind of the way I would look at this camera. If you're the type of creator who is going to be doing sit down interviews for 2 hours at a time, maybe you're recording long podcasts, any sort of video content for long periods of time, this probably wouldn't be my first camera that I would suggest for you to get. You look at something more like the FX3 or the Sony a7S III or the a7 IV if you're just shooting 24 frames per second. But if you're a creator that is kind of similar to how I plan to use this, you're shooting most stuff in bursts, you're vlogging with it, you're shooting lifestyle stuff, you're doing day in the life things. You want something small that you can take around with you pretty much anywhere, that you don't even have to have a shotgun microphone with, and you can vlog with this thing. This is the camera for you. And I'm telling you, you are not going to find a camera that is at a better price point, that is this small of a camera body and still has this good of video performance. The image that you get out of this camera is truly stunning, and it's still some of the best that is out there on the market. And it's literally this small. This thing could almost fit in my pocket. So guys, let me know down in the comments below what other questions you have about the Sony ZV-E1. I tried to cover everything that was at least important to me and kind of my real feedback on this camera. But overall, it is an absolute monster. It is a beast. And I think every single person that's picked this thing up has absolutely loved it. So again, drop me any questions you guys have down below. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. Go follow me over on my other socials if you want to see some more footage of me actually using this thing. And while you're here, check out my ZV-E1 day in the life video. I take this thing out and put it to the test. I think that video turned out fire. If you like this one, you'll like that one too. Peace, guys.